game in the sense that work with a lot of the big five consulting organizations, working through digital transformation, working through change, working through those sort of areas. But I suppose the speciality for me is about delivering clients the best change. And so part of the reason why third stage is very important to me is we're client focused as such. And so how many times do we actually have this experience when we've delivered a transformation project? And this is probably just reflective of what the silliest sense would be, is that it doesn't always go to plan. So there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't go to plan. Many times we really don't understand who we are, what we do, why we have the pain points we have, and so having the challenge where what we deliver at the end of the day ends up being vastly different and often not as efficient as what we had envisaged at the start. But we've got to have very drained bank accounts along the way. So this is one of those things that I see often, where we get deployments, and it's just doesn't make sense. And so but let's get into what is business and systems architecture for digital programs. So it essentially sets the foundation and a blueprint to align, things Stuart talked about, the operating model. Today we have ERPs that are based on applications. So they are an application within, a context of what we call an ERP. And so you might find that in the world of, if we talk about SAP, they have applications like the HCM, which is SuccessFactors, and you have Ariba and those sort of other areas. They're all SAP as such, but they are applications that fit, leverage, integrate, supposedly plug straight into the standard core ERP that might be out there. Then you'll have other options where you'll have more of an end-to-end view. If you're a manufacturing type architecture you might have a lot closer links between supply chain, and you'll have modules that actually really fit closely together, because it's very important to have that seamless approach, then bolting on different applications to actually deliver a solution. And so the key thing when we talk about application architecture is about saying, if we're going to have all of these particular applications, how do they bolt together? And, as Stuart alluded to, some people use things like middleware and they use MuleSofts and those sort of things, but that just adds to complexity. And so it's one of those, if it's possible, the simpler it is, the easier it is to manage, the more seamless it is with the information flow. And I think there's the trade-off that we have, is where we have lots of applications, we are very complex, and we are constantly recontextualizing information. And that is one of the, I suppose, the frustrations when it comes to reporting, because then we say, well, which numbers are we actually reporting? What are we doing? What's the information? How do we know it's actually still as in the same context as what it originally started at? And so application architecture is probably just the foundation level that we need to consider. It's about thinking, well, how are we going to actually get information back out of this? How do we know what we're doing? How do we actually have simplicity in the way we approach things? The second thing, obviously, is solution definition with the end-to-end. So what we're looking for, if we've got a technology platform that is there to support the business, and we talk about supporting finance, supporting procurement, supporting our resource, our people, supporting the services we offer, might be supply chain, might be warehouse, might be asset management, might be whatever. But what we're looking for is that we have people inputting information, or we're capturing information. We want to be able to roll that up so we can actually report on that information, or be able to see how we're doing, performance manage. And so solution definition has taken this trend where we are looking at end to end. It's no longer where we provide someone some information, they plug it into the system, and and we've got a few users using a system that manages or runs the business under as the underpinning layer. We now have many more people involved in the software solution, and so understanding the process taxonomy, and this is a word I picked up from Stuart. It shows that the English language is alive and well, because it's taxonomy is I think a really good description of what we talk about when we talk about end-to-end processes. It's got a lot of layers and a lot of integrations you've got to consider to be able to achieve end to end. And obviously, as we're working through it, there's change requirements. So if we've got something that's very, very complex to use and very hard to manage, then the hardest thing with that is being able to get people to use it. Because let's face it, technology is only as good as the people's ability to be able to use it. And if it's not intuitive to use, if it's not simple, people usually opt out, and we end up where we have duplication of systems. We end up where people don't put the right information in because it's too hard to do, sort of thing. And so trying to get people aligned and those change requirements that we need are a key piece in what we need to consider when we talk about business and systems architecture. And then the integration of those applications that actually deliver on what our functionality is. And so for me, it's a number of areas there that we talked about. And I think Stuart touched on some of these. And as we get a little bit deeper, you'll start to see that it's less about the technology. It's about how we want the technology to behave and what we can get out of that technology. And if I was to talk to any of the software vendors, usually the first thing you ask them is, could your software do this? And the first response is, yes, sure, we can do that. But then when you actually get into deployment and you start to deliver, you find, but you meant that. We didn't really think that you meant that level of detail. And so we would have to do certain things to actually change what we do and how we do it, sort of thing. So that is one of the big challenges that we face, is technology vendors or software vendors come in and provide us this simplistic view that their software will fix all. But if we don't know a lot about ourselves as an organization, it makes it very difficult for us to be able to be able to guide them on what we actually are needing. And so, often we overlook the fact that, technology is all you need. There's far more to the fact that technology is a cog in the wheel. It's something that supports us, but it can be as big an inhibitor to how we go about what we do as it is a benefit. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. We cannot underestimate the fact that technology is only a part of the puzzle. One area that I think happens is organizations evolve, and as Stuart mentioned, he's been around for a long time, and I can attest to the same thing, having less hair and a lot grayer than it used to be, is that we sort of have lost touch in what we actually do as an organization. And this was an interesting discussion that I've learnt over the years, that when you ask someone, what business are you in, they often look at you with a puzzled look and go, I'm in whatever business. So it might be, if I'm in, say I'm a basketball player. So I'm a basketball player. I'm in sport. Well, these days you're actually in entertainment. And so it's that subtle shift that we need to be able to consider of what our organization is. And, and reflecting on that in a sense of, government utilities, where they supply electricity. In the past we would have said, well, they're an electricity supplier, but today they're actually a infrastructure provider, and they provide a network for us to be able to have electricity. So the service they deliver is actually electricity supply. But the way they go about it is they are infrastructure as a service to be able to manage all those assets to maintain that supply for us. And so when we talk about losing touch, what we do is our focus changes from being, yes, we want to be able to service or supply something, but we also need to be able to make sure that we can actually cost effectively manage that. And if we understand what business we're in, then we are very, very clear on what technology we need and how we want that technology to behave. Digital platforms, offer end-to-end, but it's not that easy. And so as Stuart alluded to earlier, is the fact that we have this thing where we can plug software in and it's a lot more open and easy, is what they say. But when you start seeing the complexity that can be created by, middleware and the challenges that are posed by using, the different languages between, or the different philosophies between how different applications operate, then you run the risk that as you're looking for information, or as you're trying to manage data flow from end to end sort of thing, you actually have a mismatch, and then then there's a lot of work in trying to recontextualize that, revisualize that, reimagine what that actually is going to look like. And so it's really important that when you consider what your systems architecture is going to be, that simplicity is the first thing you should be considering. It's everyone will say, oh no, it's easy, we'll just add this in, but there's all those hidden things like costs, it's the complexity, the information flow, as I've mentioned there. And digital transformation is not seen as it should be. Many times we think, well, we've got a software platform at the moment, and we'll just add another one in there. It can't be that hard, But what we find is we've evolved over time, and I liken it to the fact that, we started off with, say, a single story house, and what we've done is build 5, 6, 10 stories on top of that. But what struggles is the foundation that it all sits on. So we almost have to reset that foundation. And an organization I worked with recently, in the sense that, they were a SAP house. They'd been around SAP for 20 odd years. And they'd eventually done the upgrades. But when it actually came to doing digital transformation, they realized that their underpinning infrastructure, they were going to the cloud. They had people that actually were now going to use mobility devices that they hadn't done before because they had someone loading that data in. It changed their whole world, in the sense that from an infrastructure perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, everything else changed. So it's about saying, well, what is going to change in our organization as a result of this upgrade or way we're going to do business in the future? And digital transformation is obviously often a trigger for that. We've got solutions that are out of service. We've got those sorts of things, or no longer supported, or it's costing us more because the vendor is charging us more to support them. There's a greater trend now where for software providers, it's easier to say, well, we're not going to support something forever, so we'll actually either charge you more or force you to change to either our new suite of products. And that's probably opening up a whole different world for people, because they say they're starting to evaluate, is that brand or that vendor that I had before, is that still fit for purpose for me in my new context of business? Organizations don't recognize the complexity that they build over time. And I think that, it's again back to that utility space. One time we didn't sort of consider the customer as much. We divested what we did. We had particular areas of the business that focused on it. Whereas now we look at more of that view of saying, well, we want to service our customer right from not only providing their electricity, but also their connections and other things that might happen. So we've extended, which has created complexity. So no longer are we looking at just our particular area. Even the mining space, we not only look at just what we are in mining, we actually look at the logistics and the supply chain from sourcing the materials to actually supplying them to our customers. And so we have added complexity into what we do, and we're expecting that technology should just fit together and just work with that. And as we realize, that is harder and harder to achieve unless we really understand what we're looking for. And digital transformation is complex. The devil really is in that detail, and it's interesting. Solution integrators will come in and they love doing high level process maps, and they do all of those sorts of things, and they never really consider how the business is actually operating, what really is causing that devil to come out, in the sense that the challenges we have that we're seeing are often symptoms of the root causes that lie underneath. And so once we understand that detail requirement, we then get much closer to delivering on the expectation, actually building something of an architecture. It's like, say, walking into a car dealership and saying, I want a car, and you're not telling the salesman that you actually have 6 children and you like to go camping on the weekends, and he's trying to sell you a Corvette. It really is one of those things that is the thing we need to really understand. What is the detail that sits behind it? And it's influence from the operating model. It impacts process. It impacts technology. It impacts the configuration, the way we configure that technology, and the change people need to go through. Because at the end of the day, the reason we're actually using technology is it's to be able to provide us a level of value to deliver what we do. And that's an important fact that we really shouldn't underestimate. Functional outcome over technology solution. To me, this is ultimate utopia, in the sense that we need to look at how it functions. Technology, many people have the view that if we put technology in, that's the guide of what we do. But what you find is that someone's developed a technology platform or a series of processes that do that, and you find, are they functional for what we do as an organization? And so it's a real challenge when it's that balancing act of saying, well, Mr. Vendor, I hear what you're saying, but what is the functional, how's that going to function for me? So if I've got people in the field putting information in, how is that information going to come back in? How am I going to manage the quality of that information? How am I going to do all of those sorts of things? And that's the bit that often they sort of have a bit of a shudder and realize that, that's a bit more thinking to go through that. And functionality comes from that simplified end-to-end focused architecture. So it's about saying, well, if we are going to make sure that this is as seamless as we possibly can do, we have to see what sits either side of what our particular focus is. And so if we're actually picking up something or handing off something and it's not right, it's not to the level that we need it to be, then obviously our information is not going to be, or what we're doing, our processor is interrupted. And then we add more complexity because we build workarounds to actually manage that. Simplicity over complexity. It's interesting. I've recently did some enterprise strategy for an organization, and we had a lot of providers come in and say, oh, we can put in this middleware and it'll link this best of breed and all of those sorts of things. And there is a trend at the moment where people go, well, maybe I should be best of breed everything. And we just link it together because technology allows us to do that. But does it add that layer of complexity that sort of undermines what we're trying to do? And so, and in that becomes the cost of ownership and those sorts of things that we have to consider when we do that. And for me, one of the big things that's come out in recent years is, we look at processes that we actually do, and many times we have arduous exercises of determining what processes are the as is, and then we build a future state. I believe that what we should be looking at is what are we actually doing? Because if I was to probably talk to every person in an organization, I would guarantee that many times we do the same thing many different ways. And but if we roll that up to a higher level, yes, we're probably trying to get a similar outcome, but these workarounds, that devil in the detail, is what brings us undone. And so it's really identifying what is the simplified process and how many deviations do we have from that, so we can actually start to get closer to people doing things in a consistent way, interpreting what they need, how they do it, and the way that the outcome is delivered in a similar type way. And so that's a big one for me. Right technology fit over big brand. And more and more you start to see where we've got, really, I suppose, popular brands in the marketplace, your SAPs, your Oracles, your Microsofts, all coming into the marketplace. And the big problem you have is that they have this ability to be able to market and influence, your Gartner quadrants and those sorts of things. But are they the right fit for what we need to do? And I think as we evolve to cloud options, we evolve to SaaS options, it's something we've really got to consider. Just because I'm buying, say, SAP, and I'm buying SuccessFactors, which is an SAP product application, or I'm buying Ariba, which is an SAP application, or I'm buying, Concur or Fieldglass. Are they actually, do they all just fit together and plug seamlessly together because they all fit under that big banner of SAP? Well, in reality, no, they don't. And they are separate organizations that have been brought together and actually bring out that almost like a best of breed, but under one brand. And so what we need to consider is what is what is the best way that we can actually achieve what we're looking to do. So without adding to that complexity. And business operating model over best practice. And it's interesting, Eric and I did a podcast just recently, and we talked about this in the sense that, there are some areas of the business that best practice makes sense. If I'm processing invoices, I'm doing accounts payable, I'm doing those sorts of things, how many different ways can you do it? There's probably thousands of ways that organizations do it globally, but there is probably a common thread there on how you would continue to do it in a consistent, standard way without the complexity. But when you start getting into how I operate, what my value driver is, how I actually work as an organization, then no technology provider can really actually apply just best practice on that. So, even utilities, miners, they all have different contexts, different ways that they work, or different business models. And so if we were to turn around and say, well, hang on, we'll make everybody best practice, then many times we'd be probably bringing people back in their ability to be able to be competitive in a marketplace. And so, as they talk about the symptoms, difficult to get user adoption if we have this complexity. If we, require technology to address the gaps. So what you find is we'll get halfway through an implementation and realize that we hadn't considered that there are certain gaps. And so then we start adding extra technology in to actually cover those gaps. Efficiency loss. So, the big thing is that if we become less efficient, then the cost to transact becomes greater. And so we get affected in our bottom line. And so that's something as an organization, it's not what we want to be, sort of thing. And so operating model conflicts with the technology functionality. So what you find is, here's what we offer as a service, and all of a sudden we've got technology that almost competes with that. And that's not a good place to be. And that's where a lot of these failures get recognized, in the sense that all of a sudden we've got technology in here, and we actually can't deliver the service as we had envisaged we would deliver that service. The business case value is unrealizable, and that's one of the big areas that we see often in new technology, is the fact that we determine a business case, but that value that's actually put forward on why we're actually doing the change or putting in the new technology, we never ever realize that value again. And often that value is a cost that is a burden to us as we continue to move forward. Solution design with an organization at the moment where, they've bought technology in and they're trying to make their technology the same as the technology they had. And so it's an engineering group, and so they're looking to tweak everything they can. And so, solution design windows can't be closed off. So we can't actually get in to actually deliver this, because we're constantly evolving, changing, adding, which is cost, which is time, which is obviously, how can we keep adding more money into the budget? Eventually you've got to have that line in the sand as such. And so that's an area that challenges, and that leads to those cost and time blowouts. And scope, and the challenge of that is that as we get to a point where we must deliver, we end up putting in a reduced scope, which takes us back to the start, where we're actually trying to address, we had this functionality, we had this expectation that we were going to address it and fix it. We get to the end of the way we've actually delivered it and the complexity we've provided, and we've actually got a less of a scoped item. So we have less functionality, and then we've got to go back and do the exercise again and try and regain that functionality. And duplication. Many times if we don't do the change piece right, we end up where we have people doing things the old way or their way, and we have what technology is guiding us to do, or what we've actually developed in technology. And that's something that, is a problem when we don't really understand a clear business operating model and how that business should actually be operating. And that's driven down through the different areas of the business. I feel, I look at this and I think that the one thing that depicts this for me and probably hopefully puts it in perspective when we talk about business architecture, systems architecture, organizational structure and processes, they are all layers. And just like we have layers of an onion in this instance here, if we if we aren't clear on our business architecture, what business are we in? Where do we derive our value? And I think Stuart talked a lot about this, and this is part of that strategy piece. If we don't understand what we are, what context, what our model should be, then how can we actually start then to influence systems technology? And many times what happens is we start at the systems level, and we fail to consider whether we have changed as an organization, whether our operating model is still the same as it should be, whether we actually deliver the services that we do, whether we're measured the same. And so you can see where that mismatch starts to happen. And then, we might come in and put systems in, but do we actually look at the org structure? Is it that we actually have departments that actually don't deliver or don't support how the system has been set up? And so often you start to see where, if we're a organization where we are delivering, say, lots of projects, we'll have a structure that's set up that actually manages those projects, but the technology is looking at some of the other things that we're actually doing. So some of the finances, some of those other areas. And so the system architecture almost competes with the way that we actually are set up. And so we need to consider, what is it that we actually are doing as an organization, which should be influenced from that operating model, business architecture, and it all layers its way down to the point that we start saying, well, now we've got people in the organization, we have technology, which both have processes. How do we align those processes so we end up where those processes don't compete with each other? And so systems architecture is what applications we have, but also drives what technology processes sit within that. And our config, or our application architecture, our functional architecture, also drives how we're actually going to deliver those processes. And so you can see how integrated or interweaved everything is, and it all relies on having the different layers, and those layers need to be influencing the other and building and leveraging on the other part of the organization. And so, business architecture is commonly defined as business structure, although the component of structure needs to be considered. If we have, if we have multi-entity, or we have company or site, and often that's what we consider as business architecture. But from my view, it's deeper than that. It's the sense of, how do we operate? What do we do? An organisation that we've just finished an engagement with, we talked about business architecture, and so they went off and got Bain & Co. to actually look at how they should actually operate as entities. Should they be centralized? Should they be decentralized? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how we operate as an organization, as a business, as a cohort of people delivering a service as such. And I think that's the big difference that we have when we talk about it. It's less about the technology, but if we don't consider how we want that technology to work, then we've technology is not going to fix our problem. The myths that we start seeing, common myths, is technology vendor is the world's best practice. So we don't need the step of building architecture, because all of a sudden we'll just ask the provider. Technology provider will come in and say, it's okay, we've got this model, or this particular focus in our offering. SAP is very good at this, in the sense that they have utilities, or they'll have a mining, or they'll have a transport, solution, technology solution. But that doesn't take away the need to actually make sure our business architecture is very solid, and see where those gaps are between what that specialist option that the provider might offer, and where those gaps are, because there will be a significant amount of functionality gaps that sit within that. The solution integrator has a model or a framework for this, and we see that having worked for many of the larger system integrators or solution integrators, you find that they leverage. We've got a model that actually fits your organization. Well, they say the same thing to every organization they walk into. So is it that they're trying to provide the cookie cutter approach, and that's what frameworks can obviously lead you to? Or should they actually be really understanding what you do? Do they ask those questions, or are they just applying a framework? And these are things that that we find often lead to where failures happen, because a system integrator has applied a particular framework, but really not in tune with what that particular business, in the way it's contextualized, the market it's in, what drivers are, what disruptions it's happening are actually leading to its architecture to be challenged. It's aligning with your business structure model. You know, that again is the fact of where we have this view of, well, I've got 5 entities globally stretched around the world, sort of thing, and so that's all I need to worry about, that I've just got these entities and we need to report into that. No, it's how do we want those entities to add value? And so business architecture is that complete piece that actually brings together all of that. It's not just about that high level reporting. It's not just about saying, well, we're structured as a decentralized model or a centralized model. It's about understanding, well, how do we derive value in what we do? How do we function to deliver our service isn't important. And that's one that really is a struggle for me to listen to, because if we don't function effectively, and it's interesting, how have many of the disruptors come into the marketplace and been able to push all of the market share apart and actually create their own market? It's because they are very clear on how they function, what they offer, why they are different, and what their competitive edge is. And when they actually have that defined, you see the inefficiencies with many of these organizations who really don't appreciate that, understanding an operating model and cascading that down through the organization. What are we really in business for? How do we bring value? Then we are caught out when we have a disruptor come into the marketplace and we're left struggling, or we're left wanting. Systems architecture. Technology vendor has focused solution for the industry, and I talked about that a little bit earlier, in the sense that, you know, we've got these fit for purpose type modules or solutions that the vendor comes in with. They may be high level, and they've probably got a number of the key areas that are focus areas. So you're not bringing in things that you're not going to use, or less of those. But they still need to be configured. They still need to be applied. They still need to actually fit your context. And so, so the view that systems architecture, because you're bringing in just a technology-focused solution, it really is a myth. Technology vendor has the world's best practice, so we don't need that step. You know, once again, it's a real challenge in the sense that, yeah, sure, for our finances, for those sort of things, that might ring true. But when we actually talk about, and I think in lots of times you talk about the competitive edge, the secret sauce, the reason we are in business and successful as we are, we need to be able to make sure that best practice is being able to be delivered. And a technology vendor with best practice just brings everybody to the same level. And that's, I suppose, one of the challenges we have, leveraging best practice as against leveraging best practice for you as an organization, so which will be distinctly different from someone else in the same actually industry in many cases. Solution integrator has a model or a framework for this, and once again, it's one of those things where, you know, we work a lot in the utility space, or we work a lot in the mining space. So we've got a framework that we can actually apply. We've got all of these high level processes. Again, once you get the devil in the detail, you realize that's where they go off track, is the fact that the high level frameworks, unless they're applied and they're actually built with the context of what your organization is, then they struggle. And again, it's not a technology thing, it's actually understanding your business. And this is where we often find that people focus on technology only, as against understanding really what they want, what they need, how they work, and what they should do, and then let the technology fit within where it should fit with that. And we can, you know, we can really build a very, very close relationship if we understand that. And solution over function outcome. So, you know, let's put in the solution, it'll function as it functions. Well, many times we find that that's not the case. And it's not until we get into the deployment side of things where we are left scrambling, because all of a sudden we're in unit testing, we're in those sort of things, and we're getting high defects because that doesn't function as we thought it would do. Although the solution, that's the way the solution works. So it's really one of those things that that we need to make sure that we address and we consider, and don't follow the myth that these things are real. So guiding questions. I think it's always helpful to be able to sort of say, okay, well, what is it that we actually need to ask ourselves? How do we get to a position where we are informed? And so things that are important that I think is important is understanding if we're as an organization operating, how do we measure ourselves? What do we class as performance? If I was to talk to, say, a middle management group within an organization, I might find that their view on what performance is different than what a senior executive leadership team might see as performance. And so it's about understanding how we're going to be measured, because that drives our behaviors and what is important to us. And so it's important to consider that as we're actually developing our system architecture and our business architecture, we actually find those points of saying, well, at this point here is where we would measure it this way, or here's how we would actually view it from that side. So that becomes part of our systems architecture, because at certain points we want to know that whatever we're reporting or whatever information we're deriving out of the system, we can view that as the effectiveness either of the process, of the business, of the organization, of the way we do what we do. So that's an important question for us to ask when we're looking at business and systems architecture. Has our market changed, or has the expectation within the market changed? And I talked a bit about that utility. And so, if we look in many other organizations of different type offerings, manufacturing, there's a change in that. We've got automation, we've got industry 4.0, and we've got all of those sort of things that are coming in. So the way we actually manage our manufacturing, we derive value from that manufacturing, we have supply chain, we have all those other areas. They have changed the way we go about our business, and so we are no longer just a manufacturer. We may be a shifter of materials, a global provider of an integrator into different supply chains, or a contributor into various supply models. Especially when we talk about the offshoring that happens, where we have components built all over the world and then we actually bring them together. And so that ability to be able to deliver not only what we've manufactured, but deliver on time as it's required, becomes an expectation that the market is placing on us as a manufacturer. How complex is your application technology landscape? And it's interesting walking into organizations that have probably had the same ERP for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And then you look at how many other applications are sitting either on the outside that don't interface, or have been tried to be interfaced in there, where they're of a level of complexity that adds to. And so it's about saying, well, if we've got it being that complex, all these applications, do we need all those applications? What are the problems that those applications were solving? Because that's what helps determine what our systems architecture should look like. So is it that we actually need to get information in from field or from supply, from that we've received goods, and all those sort of things to actually trigger other processes in the organization? And we've built applications or built interfaces to be able to do that. And it probably does provide us that functionality, even though it's probably costly. Then if we're rolling out a new platform, isn't it worthwhile to consider that up front, so we can actually say, well, these systems now are redundant. It removes complexity. It removes our ability to, or it removes our constraint of being able to manage and keep those updated. And so that's an important thing for us to be able to look at. And it also looks at, does it fit with our operating model? And so what applications are not supporting that? Because many times in organizations, we have people come, we have people go. Sometimes the applications they brought into the organization are still there, but they're not really valid anymore because they were a personal preference that would be brought in, as Stuart talked about with the Google instance from Microsoft. Sometimes we do it because we feel, well, that's how I like to work, instead of saying, well, we do it because it makes sense and fits within our operating model. Do you have a functional process architecture model? And I find this is one of probably the biggest gaps. in the sense that we'll have a grouping of like applications, but we never consider how each one will function. And for me, it's that, I suppose the analogy for me is if we were doing a relay race. And so we've got, 4 runners all sitting at their starting blocks, and we're going to hand a baton over. If we look at function as being we're handing that baton over to the next part of the process, to the next area of the business, or we're actually expecting to receive that, then that functional architecture model puts the context around how all of these physical applications will sit together. And so I think it's a gap often we see within enterprise architecture, is the fact that we look at everything as an enterprise and have the physical side, but we don't actually see how each one functions to be able to deliver what the next part needs. And so that's a key piece for me. Does the service or product offer reflect how you operate? And I think that's a big one when we've evolved over time, or we've actually, in many cases, we might have done some acquisitions. And so we find we've got all of these different companies that have been successful in their own right, now operating under our umbrella. And so do we actually, with the services we have or what we've grown to be, do we actually operate in the way that we see we should? And this is part of that operating model and recontextualizing how we operate as we've evolved. And the last one in the guiding questions is, have you reviewed the current business operating model? And this is probably one of those areas that many times we speak to the technology provider, and this is the step that gets missed. And we find that often that is probably where we come back to at the end of the day and say, why is this technology not fitting? It's because it really is our current operating model is out of date. It's if we've used that as our baseline, we have failed. And so you get so the observations that usually come out of this is the ratio of technology related questions that you actually have in this in the thing. There's not very many, is there? So you see here, it's mostly about the business and the processes, and then how technology would fit within that. Would a technology provider be able to answer all of these questions? So, many times we'll outsource the thing of, we've got a major deployment, a major digital transformation. Let's get in a SI. They'll be able to do it all for us. If we don't understand the questions ourselves, how do you think they're going to be able to answer those questions? Could a solution integrator make those decisions? Because many times that's what we're asking them to do. So we're asking them to come in and reinvent the business, and they'll do it based on what they know. They don't even work in your business. They're coming in as a supporter, as a provider. And so these are some of these common things that we often see. And making decisions about operating model set the foundation of the business and the solution architecture. And so having that very clear up front before you actually move anywhere or reset or re-foundation or do a digital transformation or complete a digital transformation, these are things that are very, very important. We'll get now into when solution architecture should occur. And so, it should be done early on, in the sense that, when we're talking about our operating model should actually be quite clear, and we should actually understand the journey that we actually do as an organization. So when we're actually working through our different processes or frameworks, it's not just about putting boxes and saying, well, this is a stream. It's saying, okay, well, now how does that journey actually happen, and understanding what we need. So that end-to-end function, we use things to support us like journey maps, checklists, flowcharts. All of those sort of things enable us to document and unpack what we think and identify where the gaps are. And that's the thing. When we assume that it's easy and it's clear, that's where we get caught out. And so by doing these sort of assessments and identifying where we all fit and how it all works, gives us that ability to be able to build a very solid business and solution and systems architecture. the thing we often miss in all of this is benefits realization. And so at the end of the day, we have a business case that says, let's do something, and we're going to get the benefit for doing this. It justifies why we're going to spend the money we're going to do. If we don't focus on that at the beginning, so when as we're building this architecture, what benefit is it going to give us? Where is that going to come from? How will we measure that? What's the value? Then when we get to the end of our deployment, we have a solution that sits in there. Maybe it's been de-scoped a bit, and so we end up where we are living with something that is a challenge for us moving forward. A challenge because it's lacked in functionality. A challenge because it's more complex now than it was, because we've got a lot more workarounds we've had to do to actually link our gaps in our system architecture that we've overlooked. And so benefits realization gives us that thing of saying, well, what makes sense, and we'll get value there, and these become the non-negotiables as we work through our delivery of the approach and the deployment that we're actually looking to do. So, and it vastly improves the ability to be able to get user adoption, because if we look at this, a key focus of getting benefits is actually getting people to use this system. And so if that operating model isn't clear, people don't understand that, then the technology and people processes become unclear. And you can imagine how much of benefits get eroded by not having that clear sight, those linkages between those as they cascade down through the organization. And a particular outsourced SI, system integrator, or a vendor doesn't have really that visibility or even that need to actually measure any of that, because for them, it's a sale. I've made a sale and you're going to be my client for however many years. For them, they often you never hear them answer the phone when it comes to, this isn't delivering what I want it to be. It's usually a very short conversation because our technology is very good, is usually what you get told. The benefits realization piece needs to be factored in every time, because that's the bit that's important to you as an organization. And we asked, where should we start? And so we should start right at the beginning, in the sense that, in that vision, in that definition, that's where we start building that understanding of what our business architecture should be. It's built on things like the strategy, as Stu talked about. It's about understanding those scenarios that we are as in a business. What's our operating model? And then, okay, so overlaying that with how are the systems going to integrate? How is the infrastructure going to work for us? And so you start seeing that these are the areas, and this is how early on that we need to start considering this as we go through what we're delivering. So it's a right at the beginning to influence the rest of the digital transformation. Who should we involve? And so when we start looking at this thing in our team, often we come in and we'll sell the vision to the senior leadership team, but do we actually get them to do a bit of the work in the sense of redefining that business architecture, understanding what it is? And many times we have it where we might have the organization get someone in to do that. If they aren't specialists and they're not a facilitator, or they have a vested interest, they will guide the business on what they view as being what the business architecture should look like. And so you need someone who actually is a bit removed from that, in the sense that, how do I facilitate this out so you get the objectivity that you actually need? And a key point with when we talk about business architecture is making sure that you get that external specialist in, so you get that thought leadership, you get that objectivity, because that's the one that actually challenges the many of the myths that actually come out into the marketplace. And when you're using internal resources, what can happen, and the trap that people find, is that they maintain the status quo without challenging it. And many times people are caught in this view that we deliver it this way. But do you realize that that's not your business anymore? Things have changed. You've evolved. The pressures of markets have altered that, and that's a big thing to consider. And so, when we talk about systems architecture, we don't necessarily need the senior leadership team involved in that, because we've already influenced that by how the business is going to operate. But we're taking through those learnings and cascading those down into how we're building that architecture. Again, when we come back into the organizational structure, senior leadership team should be part of that, because that organizational structure could change based on the architecture that we've defined, the solution we're going to put in place, and then obviously as we define those processes, how are people going to do that? There's a change effort. There's all of those sort of things that become part of it. So when we talk about different areas of the organization in preparation, in readiness to be able to get ready to be able to build things like architecture and systems architecture and your org structures and really leverage the benefit of what digital transformation provides for us, then it's important that we actually make sure the right people are involved. And so I think I've hopefully covered the subject across. There's case studies in the sense that we can talk about different organizations and the different ways they go about it. But I think the key message out of the case studies is that, we consider and give business and solution architecture the time and effort it needs to influence the rest of the decisions that we make.